When you stop contacting her, truly stop, not as some manipulative tactic, but from a place of genuine acceptance and self-respect, something very subtle begins to happen, not just outside of her, but inside of her. At first, it feels like silence, a kind of uncomfortable quiet where there used to be noise. Your texts, your voice, your attention. It might seem like nothing is happening. You might think she doesn't care. But that's not how human beings work. That's not how emotional bonds operate. You see, people grow used to presence. They calibrate their lives around the patterns of connection. And when you were in her life, consistently, perhaps even persistently, you became a part of her internal rhythm. Whether she consciously realized it or not, she knew when to expect a message, a reaction, a gesture, and when that stops, it leaves a vacuum. At first, she may dismiss it. She may even feel relieved. There's a sudden quiet that feels like freedom, but give it time and something much deeper starts to unfold. That space, that silence, begins to whisper back at her, not in words, but in feelings. She begins to notice what's missing, not just your words, but what your presence represented. Safety, attention, maybe admiration, maybe even love. The more you stay away, the more she's forced to sit with herself, with her own thoughts, her own reactions, and the mind, especially when it's used to stimulation, doesn't do well with emptiness. It seeks to fill the void, and in doing so, it starts to reflect. It searches for explanations. Why has he gone silent? Was it something I did? Does he not care anymore? These aren't just idle questions. These are uncomfortable confrontations with herself that weren't happening before. You must understand that this moment is not about punishment or playing games. It's about boundaries. It's about self-respect. And when you create distance, you allow her to confront the reality of what you meant to her without interference. When you're constantly available, she doesn't need to think. She doesn't need to feel the weight of your absence because she's never truly experienced it. But when you step away, not with bitterness but with clarity, you create space for truth to emerge, real truth, the kind that's not filtered through ego or immediacy. Over time, she'll start to see more clearly. She'll begin to distinguish between what she thought she wanted in the moment and what she actually valued long term, and in many cases, that recognition won't come in loud, dramatic ways. It might be subtle. Quiet, internal, but it's there, a stirring, a realization that what she had with you wasn't as replaceable as she might have believed. And this is the critical part. She begins to see you not as someone who begged to stay, but as someone who was willing to walk away. That reframes everything. It shifts her perception. You're no longer chasing, you're choosing, and that choice speaks louder than any words ever could. Now some women, when faced with that void, will run from it. They'll distract themselves, post on social media, keep busy, talk to other people, but distraction isn't healing, it's postponement, and when the noise fades again, and it always does, the reflection resumes. Others will sit with it. They'll listen to what the silence is telling them, and that's where transformation begins. Because if she genuinely cared, if there was any depth to the bond, that reflection starts to shift how she sees both you and herself. It may humble her, it may soften her, or it may anger her, because for the first time she's no longer in control of the narrative. But regardless of how she reacts externally, the internal process has already begun. And it began because you had the strength to stop reaching, to stop giving yourself away to someone who wasn't meeting you halfway. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. So when you let go, when you stop chasing, what you're really doing is handing her the mirror. And whether she chooses to look into it or not, that's not your burden to carry. Your role isn't to force realization. It's to honor your own value. Because in that silence, in that space, something powerful begins to shift. Not just in her, but in you. And maybe, just maybe, that's where real respect is born. From the courage to walk away, so that truth has room to walk in. Time has a strange way of softening the edges of memory. When you step away from someone's life, especially when you do it with dignity, not drama. You begin to create an entirely new experience for them. At first, the absence is noticeable only in the sense that you're not there. The daily messages stop, the check-ins vanish, the consistency disappears, but soon something else happens. Something deeper, more meaningful. She begins to revisit the past, and not just any part of the past. Not the arguments, not the tension, not the final stretch where things may have grown distant or strained. No, what comes up first, and what tends to linger, are the good moments, the ones that mattered. The ones she didn't fully appreciate in the moment because they were so easy to take for granted. That late night conversation where she felt completely seen. That day you surprised her with something small, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. The safety of knowing someone was there, consistently, not just physically, but emotionally. The feeling of being valued, not just for how she looked or what she gave, but for who she was. Memory doesn't replay life as it happened. It distills experience down to emotion, and emotion has a way of creeping back in once the noise fades. When you're no longer in contact, you remove the tension of current events. There are no new arguments, no awkward silences, no attempts to explain yourself, just stillness, and in that stillness the heart starts sorting through what it actually misses, and what it never truly valued. That's a critical distinction. Because in those quiet moments, she isn't thinking like someone who's trying to win a fight or prove a point. She's just remembering, feeling, processing, and here's the thing. Most people don't fully realize what they had when it's still there. It's a tragic truth of human psychology. When someone is always available, always showing up, always willing to be there no matter the cost, their value gets diluted. Familiarity breeds not just comfort, but blindness. You stop seeing the person in front of you clearly because they're always right there. But when that changes, when you finally step back, not out of spite, but out of respect for your own worth, clarity begins to emerge. The fog lifts. She might remember a joke you used to make that always made her laugh. She might catch herself hearing a song and immediately thinking of that time you drove together, windows down, not saying much, but feeling connected. And in those small recollections, something powerful is taking place. She's not just remembering you, she's re-experiencing you emotionally, and that emotional memory is potent. It bypasses the intellect. It speaks directly to the soul. It whispers, "Maybe I didn't realize what that truly meant to me." Now, this doesn't mean she'll come running back right away, and it doesn't guarantee anything, but it does set the stage for something genuine. Because it's not about pressure, it's about presence. When you were there, your presence became background noise. Now that you're gone, your absence has become the message, and the message is clear. Something meaningful was there, and now it's not. If there was even a thread of sincerity in her connection to you, she will feel that, she'll sit with that, she may not talk about it, she may not act on it immediately, but the past will echo in her mind more often than she'll admit. And those echoes, over time, become questions. Questions she'll ask herself in the quiet moments. Did I let go of something too easily? Was I too focused on the flaws and blind to the beauty? These are not questions of regret. They're questions of awakening. What's important for you to remember is this. Your silence created the space for her memory to become meaningful again. Not forced, not manipulated, just real. And when memory becomes meaningful, the person you once were in her life is no longer just a person. You become a symbol of something. Something rare, something grounded, something she can't easily replace. So while you're over there working on yourself, living your life, becoming stronger, clearer, and more purposeful, she's sitting with the one thing you left behind that she can't ignore. How you made her feel when things were good. And that feeling, that memory, carries more weight than any explanation, apology, or second chance ever could, because in the end, what we revisit in our minds says more about what we value than what we often admit. And if she finds herself constantly returning to the moments you shared, the laughter, the peace, the care, you haven't really left her life. You've simply become the part of it that's hardest to forget. After the silence settles in, after the initial wave of reflection and memory begins to do its work, something else stirs, curiosity, and not the shallow kind born of momentary boredom or the need for entertainment. No, this curiosity cuts deeper. It's tied directly to the fact that human beings, especially in relationships that once held meaning, are profoundly affected by absence that comes without explanation. When you stop contacting her again, not in a petty or manipulative way, but from a place of clarity and self-respect, she doesn't just notice you're gone, she starts to wonder why. And that wondering grows in intensity over time, especially when she expected you to be the one who always reached out, who always tried, who always checked in. When that pattern is broken, the brain starts looking for answers. That's what curiosity is, a hunger for understanding, and in the emotional landscape, curiosity can become an incredibly powerful motivator. She starts to ask herself questions she can't easily answer. Is he upset? Did he move on? Why hasn't he tried to fix things like he always did? These questions arise because your silence is no longer passive, it's active, it speaks, and what it says is that you've shifted. That you've stopped orbiting her world, that maybe your attention is now focused somewhere else, maybe on your goals, your health, your friends, or even someone new, and that not knowing, it starts to get to her. You see, when people are used to being in control of the emotional narrative, when they believe that someone will always be there, always be available, always be waiting, the moment that dynamic changes, their ego begins to destabilize. Not in a cruel way, but in a revealing one, because what's really happening beneath the surface is that your distance is forcing her to sit with a new and unfamiliar version of you, one who doesn't need her approval to move forward. That's unsettling, not because she necessarily wants you back right away, but because the mystery of your growth, your detachment, your peace, it creates a contrast to the version of you she had become used to. And contrast always makes people pay attention. She may not admit it to anyone. She may not even admit it to herself, but she'll start checking, quietly. She'll glance at your online status, scroll through your social media, read your captions a little more carefully. She's not just looking at what you're doing. She's trying to understand how you're doing. Are you hurting? Are you thriving? Is there someone else? That curiosity is a signal that something in her emotional world has shifted. Now, some people will try to dismiss this. They'll say, if she really cared, she wouldn't have let you walk away in the first place. But that's a superficial understanding of how people work. Often, we don't understand what someone means to us until their absence makes us feel it. Especially in a culture where constant contact and emotional dependence are taken for granted, the absence of noise, your noise, creates a mental void, and the mind rushes to fill it with speculation. She'll wonder who you've become in her absence. And the longer you stay silent, the more her imagination builds a version of you she can't quite pin down. That uncertainty creates emotional tension, and emotional tension demands resolution. That's when curiosity transforms into a need to reconnect, not necessarily to rekindle romance, but to resolve the unknown, to scratch the itch of wondering what became of the man who once poured himself into her life. And then stopped, and here's where your strength matters most. You don't chase, you don't rush to explain, because the version of you she's curious about isn't just absent, it's evolving, and the mystery of your growth becomes more attractive than any words you could offer. People are drawn to what they can't predict, to what challenges them to look inward, and when you remove yourself with grace, you challenge her not just to question what happened, but to question who she was in relation to you. It's in that questioning that genuine self-awareness can begin to take root for both of you. Because when someone begins to wonder about you in your absence, what they're really doing is wrestling with your presence in their mind. And that kind of mental and emotional engagement isn't trivial, it's profound, so let her wonder, let her scroll, let her sit with the questions. You're not here to soothe every insecurity or solve every mystery. You're here to become the kind of man who doesn't need to be understood immediately, because he's too busy becoming someone worth understanding. There comes a point, after the silence, after the memories start replaying, and after the questions begin to form, when ego steps in. And this, in many cases, is one of the most unpredictable parts of the process, because while memory is emotional and curiosity is psychological, the ego is defensive. It doesn't want to admit longing. It doesn't want to acknowledge pain. It wants to maintain power. And when you stop contacting her, that quiet, respectful withdrawal you've chosen doesn't just trigger reflection. It threatens the ego's control over the story. If she was used to being the one pursued, if she held the position of emotional authority, where you were always the one initiating, apologizing, checking in, then your silence introduces something very foreign, imbalance. And the ego doesn't like imbalance when it's no longer in its favor. It will try to restore what it thinks is order, and the way it does that is by testing your absence. It may start with something small, a vague social media post designed to get your attention, a quote about letting go or knowing your worth, something that looks like strength but is really camouflage for confusion. Or maybe it's something more direct, liking an old photo, replying to a story, or sending a short, ambiguous message like, "Hey, hope you're good." These actions aren't always about reconnecting. Often they are about control. They're not rooted in the heart. They're rooted in the need to know you're still there, that she still has access to you, emotionally if not physically, because to the ego, your silence feels like rejection. And rejection, especially when it comes from someone who once made themselves available, can be deeply confronting. It forces the other person to ask, did I matter as much as I thought I did? And instead of sitting with that discomfort, many people, driven by ego, will act out. Not necessarily in anger, but in subtle manipulations designed to draw a response. The goal isn't always to rebuild the connection. Sometimes it's just to validate that they could if they wanted to. This is where you must be strong, because these moments can be confusing. You might interpret that small message as a sign that she misses you, that she's finally coming around, but be cautious. Ask yourself, is she reaching out from a place of genuine vulnerability, or is she testing her ability to still influence you? That distinction matters more than you realize. Because if you break your silence in response to an ego-driven test, you reinforce the idea that her control over you is still intact, that you're still waiting, still available, still orbiting her world. Now, that doesn't mean you should be cold or cruel. That's not strength. That's just insecurity disguised as toughness. True strength lies in maintaining your clarity, in understanding that not every message deserves a response. Not every breadcrumb should be followed. When someone is testing you, what they're really doing is measuring your growth. And when you don't take the bait, when you don't rush back at the first sign of attention, you show that you're no longer operating from the same emotional dynamic. And that changes everything, because now she has to face something real, the possibility that you've grown beyond the version of yourself that needed her validation. That maybe, just maybe, your silence isn't about winning her back, it's about winning yourself back. That idea, once it sinks in, is powerful. It removes the ego's grip and forces authenticity to surface. It compels her to be honest, with herself first, and maybe later with you. Sometimes the test will escalate. If the subtle signals don't work, she might try to provoke you emotionally. Maybe a photo with someone else, maybe a story clearly meant to suggest she's moved on. It's a performance and it's designed for an audience of one, you. But the man who knows his worth isn't shaken by performances. He sees through them. He knows that maturity means staying grounded even when provoked. When she tests your absence with her ego, you have a choice. You can react, or you can remain still. You can chase after the image of who she used to be in your life, or you can hold your ground and wait for truth to emerge, because real connection isn't built through power games. It's built through self-awareness, honesty, and mutual respect. So when the test comes, and it often does, remember this: you're not here to prove your value to someone who only questions it in your absence. You're here to embody that value so clearly that no test, no silence, no distance can ever take it away from you again. At some point, after the silence has spoken louder than any words, after the memories have softened her pride, and after the ego's tests have failed to draw you back into old patterns, something shifts. Not always visibly, and certainly not predictably, but it shifts, and that's when you might notice something unexpected. She reaches out, but not the way she used to, not with the same energy, not from the same place. This time it's different, and it's in that difference that everything becomes clear. When a woman reaches out after you've stopped contacting her, when the energy between you has been recalibrated, it's often subtle at first. It may come as a simple message, "Hey, I saw something that reminded me of you," or a question that doesn't really need an answer. "Do you still have that book I lent you?" Maybe she reacts to a post. Maybe she shows up in a place you used to go together. On the surface, it looks casual, harmless, but there's often something beneath it. A quiet admission she isn't ready to say out loud. "I've been thinking about you, and I don't quite know how to process that yet." You see, when you stopped contacting her, you took your energy with you, not just your words, but your presence, your availability, your attention, your care, and for a while she tried to live without it. Maybe she filled the space with distractions. Maybe she convinced herself it didn't matter, but absence has a way of sharpening what was once blurry, and when you didn't come running back, when you didn't fold under the pressure of the silence, she had no choice but to face what was left. So when she reaches out now, she's not just testing the waters, she's stepping into them, not fully, perhaps, not confidently, but there's movement, and here's the part many people overlook. She's not only reaching out to you, she's reaching out to the version of you she now sees more clearly. The version who respected himself enough to walk away when connection no longer served growth. The version who chose clarity over chaos. She's not just contacting a man she used to know. She's approaching the man you've become in her absence. That difference is everything. Because when someone sees that you're no longer caught in the loop of overgiving, over-explaining, and overcompensating, they have to meet you differently. The rules change. The energy shifts. She can't just drop breadcrumbs and expect you to chase. She can't rely on nostalgia alone. She now has to show up with intention, not just curiosity. And that kind of shift can only happen when you've demonstrated, through consistent action, that your peace matters more than proximity, that your growth matters more than her approval. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean you accept her back immediately. This doesn't mean you confuse a message for a commitment or a memory for a future. What it means is that you observe, you listen, you pay attention not just to her words, but to the energy behind them. Is she showing up from a place of ego or humility? Is she trying to rekindle what once was, or does she now see who you truly are beyond what you gave her? Her reaching out is not the finish line. It's not the proof you've won. It's simply the next chapter. One that must be navigated with the same clarity that brought you here in the first place, because now the power dynamic isn't skewed. Now you're on level ground, or perhaps you've risen above the old emotional patterns entirely. And in that place, your decisions carry more weight. Your boundaries are stronger. Your vision is clearer. The truth is, when a woman reaches out after time and distance, it can be a beautiful thing, but only if it's met with mutual respect and emotional maturity. Only if both people have done the necessary reflection. Otherwise, it's just another cycle waiting to happen. So be still, be measured. You're not cold, you're calm. You're not dismissive, you're discerning. You're not bitter, you're better. And if she's truly grown in your absence, she'll recognize the value in who you are now, not just who you were when you left, because in the end, it's not about whether she comes back. It's about who you became when she was gone, and whether the man you are today would even accept the version of love you once settled for. There comes a moment, after the silence, the memory, the testing, the curiosity, and perhaps even her reaching out, when clarity demands resolution. Not through dramatic conversations or emotional declarations, but through choices. This is the part that many don't prepare for, the final part of the process, where the dust has settled and both people must confront reality as it stands, not as it once was. She will either reconnect with value, yours and her own, or she'll confirm the decision to let go, and both outcomes, if you've handled yourself with integrity, are a form of peace. When she finally sees you as you are now, not who you were when things were unraveling, but who you became after the silence, she faces a choice. It's no longer about reaction, it's about recognition. Can she see the strength it took for you to walk away? Can she respect the boundary you held, the dignity with which you left? Has she done her own work? Has she reflected, grown, taken accountability? Not just for what went wrong, but for how she responded to it. These are questions that don't always have words, but they show up in behavior, in energy, in the way she chooses to step back into your life, or doesn't. If she reaches out again, truly, honestly, it won't be with pride leading the conversation. It won't be with half-hearted gestures meant to test your temperature. It will be with vulnerability, with a willingness to meet you on level ground. She won't expect you to carry the emotional weight anymore. She won't make you guess where you stand. She'll bring clarity, not confusion. That is what it looks like when someone reconnects with value, when they realize what you were offering wasn't just attention or affection, but something rare: consistency, care, truth. And if that moment comes, it will be quiet, even sacred, because she'll understand, consciously or not, that what's on the table isn't the old relationship. It's something entirely new. It's not about re-entering your life casually. It's about aligning with the version of you who is no longer begging for connection, but standing in purpose. And not everyone is ready for that kind of depth. Not everyone is prepared to meet a man who's no longer seeking validation from love, but offering strength within it. On the other hand, there is the possibility that she doesn't return, that she remains silent, that despite the memories, the curiosity, and even the emotional testing, she chooses not to re-engage, and while that might sting in the short term, it too is a kind of gift, because it confirms that the distance wasn't just a boundary, it was necessary. It reveals that your growth has outpaced her willingness or capacity to meet you there, and that's not your failure, that's her path. A path she must walk without you. There is wisdom in letting people go who are not willing to come back with honesty and humility. And there is strength in not lowering your standards just to fill an emotional gap. When you gave her space, you also gave yourself a chance to become something stronger, more refined. You let go of neediness, you let go of control, and in return you gained clarity. Whether she responds to that clarity with appreciation or with distance is no longer your burden to manage. It's simply the truth revealing itself. This is what it means to choose self-respect over reassurance, to let go of someone not out of resentment, but out of reverence for yourself and what you bring into a relationship. If she returns and does so with genuine intent, then the future may hold something meaningful. If she doesn't, then you've already won, because you didn't lose yourself trying to keep what was never fully yours to begin with. And that's the deeper lesson. You're not here to chase someone into choosing you. You're here to become so aligned with who you are and so committed to what you deserve that whoever remains in your life is there by truth, not habit, not guilt, not ego. Just truth, because in the end, it was never about whether she came back. It was about whether you finally did,